I cut off my ex-mother-in-law's credit card the moment the divorce became final. By morning, she was banging on my door. The call came at 9:14 a.m., less than 18 hours after a judge had signed my name off Anthony Whitford's life forever. I was standing in my kitchen in silk pajamas, holding an espresso I had made for myself, in my own apartment, with my own machine, bought with money I had earned before Anthony and I had even met. The morning light was doing something beautiful across the court's countertop. I had slept for the first time in what felt like years, right in the actual center of my bed. Then my phone buzzed. Anthony's name was on the screen. I almost did not answer. I should not have answered, but I did, because in those first fragile hours of my new life, I was still carrying the old habit of picking up when he called. My mother's platinum card was declined at Bergdorf Goodman, he said. No hello. No acknowledgement that a judge had ended our marriage the previous afternoon. No pause. No basic human decency. Just straight to the demand, the way Anthony always went straight to the demand, because in 5 years, he had never once opened a conversation by asking how I was. They embarrassed her in front of half the Upper East Side, he said. I took a slow sip of espresso. They did not embarrass her, I said. They reminded her that a card with my name on it belongs to me. The divorce is final, Anthony. Eleanor is your responsibility now. She will never spend another dollar I earned. Then I hung up. I blocked his number. I finished my espresso. For a few hours, I truly thought that was the end of it. I thought cutting off the money would be the closing door. I thought that, without the financial current still running between us, Anthony and Eleanor would simply redirect their energy elsewhere, toward the next source, the way water finds the path of least resistance. I did not yet understand that Eleanor Whitford had never been motivated by money alone. She had been motivated by control. And I had just taken something from her in public. Let me tell you about the marriage first, because you need to understand what I was extracting myself from before you can understand why what came next did not break me. My name is Marissa Vance. I am 37 years old, the founder and CEO of Apex Ascendancy, a mid-sized marketing and brand strategy agency in Manhattan. I built it from a 3-person operation in a WeWork sublet into a firm with 41 employees and offices on the 22nd floor of a building in Tribeca. I started it at 26 with $40,000 in savings, and the specific, stubborn confidence of someone who had been told she was reaching too high, and decided to use that assessment as a floor instead of a ceiling. I met Anthony at a charity gala in the spring of my 31st year. He was handsome in the way men are handsome when they have always been told they are handsome, effortlessly, uncritically, as if the world's approval was simply the correct baseline from which every interaction should begin. He ran a boutique investment firm called Whitford Capital, which, as I would learn much later, had been coasting on inherited client relationships and his mother's social network since the day he founded it. And then there was Eleanor Whitford. I need to give you a moment with Eleanor, because she is the kind of character who sounds like a caricature until you meet her. Then she sounds like a warning. She was 63, impeccably groomed in the way that requires significant daily investment, and she operated on the foundational belief that her son was exceptional and that anyone he married was, by definition, a downgrade. She made this belief known to me approximately 14 minutes into our first dinner, when she referred to my agency as your little business. With the particular warm dismissiveness of someone complimenting a child's finger painting, I laughed it off. I laughed it off for 5 years. From the outside, the financial architecture of our marriage looked balanced. Anthony had his investment firm. I had my agency. We split household expenses. We both had careers. We both moved through Manhattan, as if the life we were presenting was supported from both sides. What was not visible from the outside, and what I did not fully map until the forensic accountant my divorce attorney commissioned spent 6 weeks excavating our shared financial history, was the degree to which the life Anthony presented to the world had been quietly, continuously funded by me. The credit card in Eleanor's name was the most visible piece. Platinum. No preset spending limit. I had added her as an authorized user in year 2 of the marriage, during a period when she claimed to be dealing with a temporary cash flow problem involving her Connecticut property. The temporary problem lasted 3 years. It produced $142,000 in charges. Roof repairs, vehicle leases, Bergdorf Goodman, Hermes, 2 international trips, a round of elective procedures she referred to as maintenance, and a running tab at a restaurant on the Upper East Side where she hosted weekly lunches for women who competed with one another using other people's money. I had been the other people. What I had not known, and what the forensic accountant found buried in 14 wire transfers between August and the following February, was that Anthony had also been dipping directly into Apex Ascendancy's corporate accounts, not our joint accounts. My company's accounts. He had emergency access credentials I had given him 18 months into the marriage for a specific, one-time purpose, A wire transfer I needed processed while I was traveling internationally without banking access. He had never returned the credentials. He had never mentioned them again. He had used them 14 times. $85,000. Money used to paper over the gaps in Whitford Capital's cash flow. Money used to pay dividends he had told his clients were generated by returns. Money used to sustain the performance of solvency for investors who did not know they were watching a funded fiction. I found out on a Wednesday afternoon in February, sitting in the office of my divorce attorney, Claudia Park. Claudia had been doing matrimonial law for 19 years, and she had a way of delivering catastrophic information in a voice so steady it took your nervous system a moment to catch up. The forensic review flagged 14 unauthorized outgoing transfers from your corporate operating account, she said, sliding a summary across the desk, between August 14th and February 3rd, all routed through an intermediary to Whitford Capital's primary operating account. I looked at the paper, then I looked up. He used my company's money, I said. Yes, Claudia said, to make his firm look solvent. That appears to be the case. I sat with that for a long moment. The particular quality of silence in Claudia's office, soundproofed and still on the 23rd floor, was such that I could hear my own heartbeat. What are we looking at legally? I asked. Unauthorized access to corporate funds, Claudia said. Wire fraud? Potentially. At minimum, full restitution as part of the divorce settlement. We have already filed the petition for an emergency asset freeze. The asset freeze was the first domino. Anthony's accounts, personal, business, and joint, were locked pending the financial review. The divorce proceedings moved forward. And on the afternoon the judge signed the papers, the first thing I did was call my bank and remove Eleanor Whitford as an authorized user on every account she had ever touched. The pounding started at 6:42 the next morning. I want to give you the physical sensation of it. I was asleep, genuinely asleep in a way I had not been in months, and the sound that woke me was not a knock. It was an impact. The kind that transmitted through the floor as well as the air. 3 heavy strikes against solid wood. The sonic equivalent of a person who had decided that my right to peace was secondary to her rage. Boom. 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 I was awake and upright before I had finished processing what had woken me. The clock on my phone said 6:42. The room was gray-blue with early light. Then Eleanor's voice came through the door, through the hallway, cutting through the pre-dawn quiet of my building like a scalpel. Open this door, Marissa. You do not humiliate me in public and walk away from it. I sat on the edge of my bed for a moment, my bare feet on the cold hardwood, my hands in my lap, and I noticed something interesting about my body in that moment. It was not afraid. It was done. There is a specific quality to the calm that arrives after years of managing someone else's emotions, absorbing someone else's volatility, and shrinking yourself to fit inside someone else's expectations of you. It arrives in the moment when the last thread of obligation finally breaks. Not dramatically, just cleanly. I was done. I did not put on a robe. I walked down the hallway to the foyer in my silk pajamas and looked through the peephole. Eleanor was standing there in a cream trench coat, an Hermes scarf, her hair set, her eyes wild. She was positioned close to the door in the way an animal positions itself close to something it believes it owns. Behind her was Anthony, wearing an expensive suit and holding a leather briefcase, with the posture of a man trying to look authoritative while standing behind his mother. And farther down the hall, his door cracked open, was Mr. Leonard Henderson from 4B, a retired federal judge and co-op board member, currently observing proceedings with an expression that suggested he found them both professionally familiar and deeply disappointing. I slid the brass security chain into place, turned the deadbolt, and opened the door exactly 3 inches. Eleanor's fist froze mid-swing. "Good morning," I said. "What an unpleasant surprise." Anthony stepped forward immediately with the voice. The reasonable voice. The measured voice. The slightly wounded voice he deployed whenever he wanted to reframe a situation he had helped create. "Marissa, let's not do this in the hallway. Open the door. This is just a banking issue." I looked at him. "No," he blinked. In 5 years of marriage, that particular no, clean, immediate, and requiring no explanation, had apparently never reached him before. He looked briefly confused, the way people look when a device they have relied on stops working without warning. "You are not coming inside," I said. "This apartment belongs to me. Neither of you will cross this threshold again." Eleanor shoved closer to the gap in the door. The scent of her perfume, something heavy and expensive, pushed through the 3-inch opening. "You will call the bank," she said, "and you will reactivate my card. After everything this family tolerated from you and your obsessive career." I looked at her. There was a version of me, the one who had existed for 5 years inside that marriage, who had learned to absorb Eleanor's contempt by rationalizing it, by telling myself she was difficult, but not malicious, demanding, but not cruel. That version of me might have lowered her voice. She might have retreated. She might have offered some version of a concession just to end the scene. That version filed for divorce 7 months ago. I owe you nothing, Eleanor, I said. In fact, according to the records from my company's accounts, you are the one with an outstanding balance. She blinked. What records? What nonsense? I said. $142,000. My voice was even. It carried clearly. I was aware of Mr. Henderson's door. I was aware of the acoustic quality of the hallway. I had calculated both. That is the total I can document having personally funded over the past 5 years. Your roof repair in Connecticut, your vehicle leases, your procedures, your Bergdorf account, your Hermes, the lunches, the trips. Eleanor's face had begun to change. Color was draining at the edges. She is lying, Eleanor said, turning to Anthony. Tell her she is lying. Anthony said, Marissa, lower your voice. No, I looked directly at him. But the most interesting part of the forensic review was not your mother's spending, I said. It was the $85,000 you wired out of my company's operating accounts between August and February. The hallway went very quiet. Eleanor turned to her son with an expression I had never seen her direct at him before. Not anger, not disappointment. Terror. Anthony, she said. Her voice had dropped into something small and urgent. What is she talking about? Anthony's posture, the suit, the briefcase, the authority he carried as a costume, collapsed in approximately 3 seconds. He looked very suddenly like a caught child. Mom, she is being vindictive. Don't listen to... I have the forensic accounting records, I said. I picked up the black leather folder from the entry table. I had placed it there the night before deliberately, because I had known this conversation was coming. I held it where they could both see it through the gap. 14 wire transfers, I said. Dates, amounts, routing numbers, IP addresses traced to devices registered in your name. The funds were used to cover Whitford Capital's operating shortfall and to make dividend payments to investors. Your investors, Anthony. The ones who think their returns are being generated by your investment strategy. Eleanor's hand went to the wall. The Aspen trip, she said, almost to herself. The car lease. You told me those came from quarterly dividends. Anthony said nothing. His silence was more complete than any confession. I looked at Eleanor. This woman who had spent 5 years dismissing my work. This woman who had called my agency little, critiqued my clothes at family dinners, questioned my hours, implied that Anthony had married beneath himself, charged $142,000 to my name, and treated it as her due. My agency, I said, was the only thing keeping your son's image alive and your lifestyle intact. You called me cheap and unrefined. You said I was too focused on work to be a real wife. But my work was the reason you still had a credit card. Anthony found his voice. It was the cornered kind, thin and desperate. I will sue you for defamation. I looked at him. Please do, I said. My attorneys would love to enter these transfer records into public evidence. Let's see what your remaining investors do when they understand how their dividends were funded. He had no answer. The briefcase in his hand suddenly looked like a prop. Do not come back to this building, I said. Do not contact me. If either of you violates that boundary, these files go directly to the district attorney's office. Claudia Park has the complete package ready for filing. I looked at them both one final time. Then I closed the door. The deadbolt slid home. Through the wood, I heard Eleanor's voice. It was the hiss of a woman recalibrating rapidly, processing the distance between who she thought I was and who I had just shown her I was. I heard Anthony's lower murmur trying to quiet her. Then, distantly, I heard the soft close of Mr. Henderson's door down the hall. I walked back to my kitchen. My hands were steady. I poured a second espresso. It tasted like the first morning of something. 2 days later, a cease and desist letter arrived at Apex Ascendancy's legal address. It was aggressive and thin, the work of an attorney who had been engaged quickly and cheaply, possibly on credit. It demanded the unfreezing of marital assets, threatened defamation claims for my statements in the hallway, and used the phrase intentional infliction of emotional distress in a way that suggested the author had found it in a template. My lead counsel was a woman named Sarah Okafor, who had spent 17 years in corporate litigation and had the particular quality of someone so competent that she found aggression boring. She read the letter. She did not call me. She sent a 2-paragraph response. The first paragraph noted the claims. The second attached, in full, the forensic accounting documentation, 14 wire transfers, dates, IP addresses, device registrations, routing numbers, and a 3-page summary prepared by the forensic accountant, Neil Ferraro, who had spent 22 years doing exactly this kind of work and whose expert documentation had held up in 11 prior fraud proceedings. The final line of Sarah's letter asked whether Anthony's counsel wished to receive the package directly or whether they would prefer she forward it to the NYPD Fraud Division. It also noted that the deadline for withdrawal of the legal threat was 5:00 p.m. the following business day. The cease and desist was withdrawn at 3:47 p.m. Sarah forwarded me the confirmation with a one-line email. As expected, call me if anything else surfaces. Nothing else surfaced. What came after the door closed and the lawyers went quiet was something I had not fully anticipated, because I had been so focused on the architecture of extraction, the divorce proceedings, the asset freeze, the forensic documentation, the hallway confrontation. I had been so focused on getting out that I had not left much room to imagine what the space would feel like once it was cleared. At first, it felt like silence. Then it started feeling like room. I went back into Apex Ascendancy with a quality of attention I had not been able to give it in years. Not because I had not been working. I had always been working, relentlessly, often at the expense of everything else. But because a significant portion of my mental bandwidth had been perpetually allocated to management. Managing Anthony's ego around my success. Managing Eleanor's feelings about my ambitions. Managing the performance of smallness that my marriage had required. That bandwidth came back to me. I had not understood, until it returned, how much of it had been taken. 3 months after the divorce, Apex Ascendancy pitched a campaign to a Fortune 500 athletic brand. It was the kind of account firms 3 times our size competed for. The kind of account where you walk into a boardroom knowing you are the underdog, and you either fold under that knowledge or you use it. I walked in wearing an emerald green blazer, carrying 18 months of consumer behavior research, a brand repositioning strategy, and the specific confidence of someone who had recently stood in a hallway and said everything she had spent 5 years swallowing. We won, not narrowly, decisively. The CEO was a direct, data-driven woman named Patricia Sloan. She had been running the brand for 6 years and had a reputation for choosing agencies that could keep up with her thinking. She signed a multi-year retainer, shook my hand, and said, "I have sat through 40 of these pitches. Yours was the only one that made me feel like you had actually listened." I took my senior team to dinner that night. We went to the Michelin-starred restaurant on the Upper East Side, where Eleanor had once, on my birthday, examined the menu and said she was surprised I had chosen somewhere so fussy, given my practical sensibilities. I had spent that birthday dinner feeling quietly humiliated by a comment I never addressed. This time, I ordered the tasting menu. I ordered wine for the table. I picked up the check without looking at the total. Not out of carelessness, but because I was finally spending money on people who understood what it cost to earn it. I saw Anthony once more, about 4 months later. It was morning in the financial district, and I had coffee in my hand. I was heading to a strategy meeting. He was coming out of a building I recognized as the kind that housed accountants and restructuring consultants, the people you hire when a business is in the process of unwinding rather than growing. He looked up and saw me before I could decide whether to redirect. The Italian suits were gone. What he wore was gray, ill-fitting, and tired in the way of clothing that has not been replaced when it should have been. His posture had changed most significantly. The easy, inherited confidence that had once been his most convincing characteristic was absent. What remained underneath it was something more ordinary, and much less sure of itself. "Marissa," he said. "Anthony." He looked at the coffee tray I was carrying, at my blazer, at whatever expression I was wearing without knowing it. "You look incredible," he said quietly. There was no strategy behind it. Just the flat truth of what he saw. "Thank you," I said. "Is the agency?" "Very well," I said. "We just closed the Triton account." I watched his eyes change. He knew what Triton was. He knew what it meant for a firm our size to close a client like that. I watched him run the math and land on the number of what he had walked away from, or more accurately, what he had lost when I walked away from him. He opened his mouth. I waited to see what came out. Nothing useful came out. Just the ambient sound of a man standing in the debris field of his own decisions, unable to find language for what he wanted to say, because what he wanted to say was tangled up with wanting things he no longer had any right to want. "Take care of yourself," I said. Then I stepped around him. I did not look back. Not because it was dramatic, not because it was symbolic, but because there was genuinely nothing behind me worth turning toward. 1 year after the judge signed the papers, I hosted a dinner in my Tribeca apartment. The bay windows were open. October air moved through the living room. The apartment smelled like roasted garlic, good wine, and the particular warmth of a room filled with people who actually wanted to be in it. My senior team stood at the kitchen island, arguing cheerfully about a campaign concept. College friends from my 20s were on the sofa, the ones who had driven over during my separation with food, wine, and the particular loyalty of people who show up without being asked. Neil Ferraro, the forensic accountant, came at Claudia's invitation and turned out to be genuinely funny once removed from a professional context. Mr. Leonard Henderson from 4B stood near the fireplace, telling stories from his years on the federal bench to a group of junior analysts who were listening with the focused attention of people encountering a genuinely good narrator. I stood near the window with sparkling water and looked at the room. There was no tension running under the conversation, no monitoring required, no one performing for someone else, no calculation about whose feelings needed management or whose ego needed service. Just people who had chosen to be in a room together because they wanted to be. I thought about Eleanor pounding on my door at 6:42 inches the morning, dressed for confrontation in her Hermes scarf, certain that her rage was a currency I would cash. I thought about Anthony in that hallway, briefcase in hand, watching 5 years of fiction collapse in real time under the weight of documented fact. I thought about Claudia Park, who had spent 19 years doing this work, and who had looked at me across her desk when I first came to her and said, "The hardest part of this process, for most people, is not the legal complexity. It is giving themselves permission to stop carrying what was never theirs to carry." I had not understood what she meant until I was standing in the center of a room that was completely, quietly, entirely mine. Eleanor had called me cheap. She had called me obsessive. She had looked at a woman who had built a firm from $40,000 in savings and decided that the most accurate word for her was unrefined. She had spent 5 years trying to make me feel small for the exact quality that had built everything she was helping herself to. I thought about all of that, standing at my window with October air moving across my face, and I felt something I want to be precise about, because it is easy to mistake it for satisfaction or triumph. It was neither. It was clarity. The specific, settled, irreversible clarity of a person who has finally, completely stopped arguing with what was always true. I was never the problem. I was the resource they fought over losing. There is a difference, a large one. And on the night of the first anniversary of my freedom, standing above Manhattan with a room full of people who had chosen to be present without being asked, I finally knew the difference all the way down. Respect cannot be purchased. It cannot be leveraged. It cannot be extracted from someone who has made the decision to require it. It can only be given freely, or it can be refused. I had spent 5 years negotiating that refusal in smaller and smaller increments, until the morning I woke up and understood there was nothing left to negotiate. The card had been canceled. The door had been closed. The rest was mine,